The world had barely begun to process the horror when the second wave of bombs fell. Aria Jensen had been in her office when the first explosion shook the earth. At first, she thought it was a tremor, a natural disaster, something easily explained. But when the sky lit up with an unnatural violent flash, she knew something was wrong. She ran to the window, watching in disbelief as buildings crumbled to the ground, and the massive ships in the sky unleashed another round of destruction. The Drathari were here, and they weren't asking for anything. They were taking everything. It only took hours for chaos to engulf Earth. Across the globe, air defenses scrambled in vain against the alien invaders. Every nation's military was caught off guard, and despite their advanced technology, humanity's scattered forces were ill-prepared for the overwhelming power of the Drathari. It was the kind of blitzkrieg that no one could have anticipated. The invaders bombed civilian targets, not just military ones, leaving entire cities reduced to rubble. The military was left reeling, unable to mount an effective defense as the alien fleet loomed overhead. In the chaos, Aria's instincts kicked in. She knew that the first step to survival was organization. As the bombing continued, she grabbed her comm unit, sending out a series of encrypted messages to her network. They couldn't afford to wait for orders. They had to act. Now, survival is the first mission. Get to the underground bunkers. I'm organizing a resistance. Aria's voice crackled through the speaker. She wasn't just speaking to her team, but to the world. The survivors would rally together. By the time the Drathari began their third wave, it became clear their goal was not just invasion. Extermination was their mission. They had underestimated humanity's ability to fight back, but Aria already had the beginnings of a plan. Earth wasn't as defenseless as it appeared. As the dust settled over what had once been thriving cities, Aria set to work. She rallied a small group of survivors, a mix of military personnel, civilians, and engineers, focusing on getting humanity's most precious resource, knowledge. All across the globe, people were digging into the wreckage, scrounging for anything useful. The Drathari, who had advanced technology far beyond Earth's wildest dreams, hadn't expected humans to fight like this. But then again, they had no idea who they were dealing with. Aria's team scouted the wreckage of military bases, salvaging old data from destroyed servers and bringing it back to their makeshift base. It wasn't much, but it was enough to start piecing together a plan. As Aria looked over the data, her mind raced. They had Drathari tech. It was primitive by their standards but invaluable. More importantly, it was familiar. The Drathari didn't realize it, but their technology shared core similarities with humanity's most cutting-edge systems. There were similarities in the energy sources, the way their ships were structured, the communication networks. Even though the Drathari were centuries ahead, humanity had a head start now. Aria knew what she had to do. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about countering. The message from the president, "You bombed us. How cute, here comes our counterattack," was not just a statement of defiance. It was a warning. Meanwhile, far above Earth, the Drathari watched as their assault continued. General Tsokath, the commander of the Drathari invasion fleet, paced inside his command ship, a massive warship orbiting the planet. He stared down at the pale blue world below, which seemed far less terrifying from this high up. His species had conquered dozens of worlds, each one bowing before the might of the Drathari military. But something was wrong. The humans weren't reacting like the others. No desperate surrenders, no overwhelming panic. They were doing something strange, something unexpected. Tsokath's second-in-command, Tarax, approached him with a datapad in hand. "Sir, we've detected unusual energy surges coming from Earth's surface. They appear to be small-scale countermeasures, but..." He trailed off, uncertainty creeping into his voice. "We have never encountered resistance like this." Tsokath's eyes narrowed. He had expected a brief, decisive campaign. This was not what he had planned for. The humans should have cowered. But they weren't. Increase our bombardment. Sokath ordered sharply, but even he could feel the seeds of doubt taking root. His fleet had crushed every civilization it had encountered in less than a day. Yet this world, these humans were different. He could feel it. Back on Earth, the resistance was beginning to show signs of life. Aria Jensen, working in the shadows of humanity's crumbling cities, began to forge alliances. She contacted military generals, political leaders, and even civilians with knowledge of the Drathuri, using their technology and artifacts to gain insight into the alien invaders' weaknesses. A scattered network began to form, all united under the banner of survival. Within days, the resistance struck back. They hacked into the Drathuri's communication network, causing a series of glitches that disrupted their ability to coordinate with one another. It wasn't much, but it was enough to buy humanity some time. And that was all they needed. Aria stood in front of a crumpled projection screen in a makeshift bunker, her face hardening with resolve. "We're not finished. Not by a long shot," she muttered. Her eyes swept over the ragtag group of survivors who had gathered around her, engineers, soldiers, civilians. They were the heartbeat of the human resistance. The odds were impossible, but Aria had one advantage over the Drathuri. Humanity's greatest strength, the ability to adapt, to overcome, and most importantly, to fight back. She slammed her fist down on the table, her voice sharp with conviction. "We hit them where it hurts. This war isn't over. It's just beginning." The days following the first wave of destruction were a blur of shattered lives and desperate determination. Earth's cities lay in ruins, entire populations wiped out by the relentless Drathuri bombardment. But in the quiet aftermath of the initial assault, as the world mourned and reeled, something unexpected began to stir beneath the surface. Aria Jensen moved quickly, organizing what remained of humanity's scattered military forces and rallying civilians into a network of resistance cells. She knew they couldn't fight the Drathuri on their terms, not yet. But that didn't mean they were without a weapon. Human ingenuity had always been a force to be reckoned with, and now, with the remnants of Earth's most brilliant minds, Aria would exploit every scrap of knowledge they had. In the darkest corners of underground bunkers, Dr. Elias Rook, a physicist and engineer, had been working tirelessly. While the Drathuri had brought advanced weaponry and devastating technologies, it became apparent that they had underestimated humanity's ability to adapt and innovate. Rook had noticed something odd about the Drathuri tech, an unusual energy pattern, a flaw in their communication systems, and small, inexplicable shifts in their weapons' behavior. He had worked through the night, mapping out the data with what little resources they had left, and had a groundbreaking revelation. The Drathuri's power systems weren't just advanced, they were familiar. "Aria, you need to see this." Rook's voice crackled over the comm unit. "I think we've been handed a way to strike back." She hurried to his makeshift lab in the heart of their underground stronghold, the flickering glow of a damaged projector lighting his face. "What have you found?" she asked, breathless with anticipation. Dr. Rook's eyes gleamed as he gestured to the holographic projections floating above the table. The Drathuri may be centuries ahead in terms of technology, but they didn't create it from scratch. Their power source, their energy grid, and the way they've designed their ships, it's eerily similar to our early prototypes in advanced fusion technology. Aria's brow furrowed in disbelief. "Are you saying we can reverse engineer their tech?" "Not just that. We can use it. It's an odd convergence of our old research and their newer systems, but I think we can adapt it for our own use," Rook said, his fingers flying across the screen, rapidly pulling up blueprints, calculations, and simulations. "This is our edge. It's not just about brute force anymore. It's about exploiting their weaknesses." Aria felt a surge of hope, but she knew better than to show it too early. "How long before we can implement this?" Rook hesitated, running his hands through his hair in frustration. "We need a prototype. I can't promise the technology will hold up under pressure, but we have to try. If we can launch a targeted counteroffensive, we might buy ourselves enough time to build a real defense." That was all Area needed to hear. They had a plan. And a plan, no matter how tentative, was a lifeline. The resistance team sprang into action, and the world watched as the once fragmented humanity began to unite. What followed was an unparalleled effort of collaboration and innovation. Scientists, engineers, military tacticians, and civilians pooled their knowledge, working around the clock to create the technology that would turn the tide. In the ruins of cities, hidden deep in underground bunkers, humanity's most brilliant minds developed makeshift EMP devices, holographic decoys, and disruptor weapons. They needed more than just physical tools. They needed intelligence. The Drathari had advanced tech, but they were still vulnerable to human creativity. It became clear that humanity's strength lay in adaptability. Where the Drathari had been methodical, unyielding in their approach, humans could think outside the box, pivoting, adjusting, and overcoming at the speed of necessity. In less than 2 weeks, a small army of survivors had crafted makeshift weaponry and sabotage tactics that would rival some of the most advanced militaries on Earth. Area knew their first step had to be subtle. They weren't ready to launch a full-scale offensive yet, but they could test the waters. It was time to strike. Small, strategic hits designed to confuse and cripple. The first operation was simple: hack into the Drathari's communications grid. As the Drathari relied heavily on their network to coordinate across their fleet, disrupting that connection could create a deadly ripple effect. In a daring operation, Specialist Darius Lai, a former cyber warfare expert, led a team of hackers to infiltrate the Drathari's orbital satellite. Using the salvage data from Dr. Rook's findings, they planted a virus deep within the Drathari network, causing communication failures at critical moments. The first test strike, aimed at a single Drathari warship, was a resounding success. The ship's systems went down for nearly half an hour, allowing a small resistance force to board and seize control of several valuable Drathari weapons. "We did it." Darius's voice came through Area's comlink. "The ship's ours, and I've accessed their fleet coordination channels. It's like hitting a beehive with a stick. They have no idea what just happened." The success was exhilarating, but Area knew better than to let her guard down. The Drathari would quickly adapt, and they would retaliate. The mission wasn't about the prize. It was about sending a message. And the message was clear. Humanity was not done yet. Back on the Drathari fleet, General Xokath seethed with frustration as he reviewed reports of the communication glitches. "This cannot be happening," he growled, slamming his fist onto the control panel. "How are they doing this? They are primitive, insignificant." But even as he raged, the Drathari continued their bombardment, convinced that their overwhelming superiority would eventually break humanity's spirit. What they hadn't accounted for was something far more dangerous than technology: the sheer determination of the human race. "Do not underestimate them," General Tarax, his second-in-command, warned. "They are reacting too quickly." "I do not care," Xokath snapped, pacing. "We will crush them." But deep down, even he knew that the humans were starting to push back in ways he had not anticipated. And that realization began to gnaw at him, like an unwelcome shadow lurking in the corner of his mind. On Earth, as small victories began to pile up, humanity's resolve solidified. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were adapting, fighting back, and most importantly, they were doing it together. Area stood before a map of the world, now covered in red pins, each one marking a point of resistance. Every attack, no matter how small, had cost the Drathari something. The more they fought, the more humanity's legacy began to take shape. "We're going to make them regret this," Area said, her voice cold with purpose. "Let them think it's cute. We've only just begun." The Drathari had underestimated the resolve of Earth's survivors, and now they were beginning to feel the weight of their mistake. In the wake of the successful sabotage and the surprising capture of their warship, humanity was emboldened. What had begun as small-scale guerrilla strikes and isolated counterattacks was now evolving into something much larger, a global uprising. Area Jensen had become a symbol of resistance. No longer just a military strategist, she was now the face of humanity's defiance. But even she knew that the coming weeks would be crucial. The Dratheri were not just a force of destruction. They were a complex, well-oiled machine. Humanity's tactics needed to evolve quickly if they were to survive, let alone defeat them. Area, we've got another problem, Darius Lai said, his voice crackling through the comlink. They're sending in shock troops to take control of the power grid in the Pacific region. If they succeed, we lose a lot of our resources. We can't let that happen. Area clenched her jaw. Every time they hit the Dratheri hard, they retaliated with an even more destructive force. But it wasn't just the shock troops she was worried about. It was the psychological warfare the Dratheri had unleashed in retaliation. They were systematically targeting cities where humanity's resistance was strongest, erasing entire populations in brutal, targeted strikes. The human spirit, though, was not so easily crushed. We'll stop them before they can land, Area said, her voice calm but resolute. Get the rest of the team prepped. We're going in. The next few hours were a blur of action. Area and her team coordinated with resistance forces stationed along the Pacific coast, where Dratheri forces were attempting to establish a foothold. Their goal wasn't just to defend. They had an offensive strategy this time. A new form of warfare, a mix of high-tech decoy systems and classic human cunning. The Dratheri were expecting a direct defense, but instead, they would be greeted with chaos. The first part of the plan was simple: holographic decoys. Humanity had scavenged enough alien tech to replicate a version of the Dratheri's own cloaking and hologram technology. The idea was to create a false force, one that would make the Dratheri think they were walking into a full-scale trap. As the Dratheri landed their shock troops on the Pacific coastline, they were met by the false appearance of a heavily fortified human stronghold. The decoys, elaborate projections of human tanks, soldiers, and warships, were designed to mislead, to give the impression of an overwhelming resistance. Area watched from a high vantage point as the Dratheri forces moved into the kill zone. Now, she whispered, the real humans, hidden within the terrain, attacked from the shadows. The decoys had done their job, confusing the Dratheri and buying just enough time for humanity's elite strike force to move in. What followed was a chaotic melee, with the human forces using hit-and-run tactics, ambushing the shock troops in small, tactical groups that vanished into the landscape just as quickly as they appeared. Area's team moved fast, deploying EMP pulses to disable Dratheri equipment. The soldiers adapted quickly, using the environment to their advantage, slipping between forests, camouflaging themselves in the rocky terrain, and using the holograms as cover for sudden strikes. A moment of triumph came when Lieutenant Sarah Wells, one of Area's most trusted commanders, initiated a coordinated trap. Using an abandoned Dratheri warship's cloaking device, she and her team snuck behind enemy lines and cut off the Dratheri's escape route. In a matter of hours, the shock troops were pinned down, and the remaining forces were forced into disarray. This is it. Sarah's voice came through Area's comm. We've got them on the run. They're retreating. Area exhaled, a rare moment of satisfaction sweeping over her. But she knew they weren't out of danger yet. The Dratheri would regroup. They would learn from this, and they would adapt. But for now, humanity had won a critical victory. Back in the Dratheri command ship, General Xokath watched the retreat unfold in frustration. The human attack had been unexpected, their tactics unlike anything he had anticipated. His fleet's loss wasn't just a strategic setback, it was a moral blow. The Dratheri were not accustomed to failure, especially not from a species they had so easily assumed would bow before their might. They're smarter than we thought, General Tarak said, his voice measured, and they're adapting faster than we anticipated. This resistance is unpredictable. Xokath stood in silence for a moment, weighing his options. His gut told him that Earth was not going to fall without a far more aggressive approach. But he couldn't ignore the fact that humanity was not just surviving. They were evolving into something formidable. "Prepare a full-scale counterattack," Sokath ordered finally. "And tell our forces to stop underestimating them. I want every fleet ready for a total assault." On the ground, the human resistance was already planning its next steps. Arya gathered her team in the war room, the glow of multiple screens lighting up their faces. She watched as the holograms of Drathari ships and human countermeasures flickered before her. "It's working," Darius said, eyes focused on the screen. "But we can't let them gain too much ground. They'll try to hit us harder next time." "We'll be ready," Arya replied. Her mind raced with possibilities. Humanity's strength was in its adaptability, its unpredictable nature. The Drathari, for all their technological power, still didn't understand the human spirit. Arya looked at each member of her team. "We're not just trying to survive. We're going to show them that they messed with the wrong species. We will push back, and we will keep pushing." The plan was set into motion, a counterstrike of their own, a series of quick raids across multiple continents, attacking Drathari supply lines and breaking their momentum. They would make the aliens fight on human terms, a battle of guile, speed, and resourcefulness. The Resistance's victories, though hard-won, were beginning to paint a picture. The Drathari were not the unstoppable force they had once seemed. Humanity's fire was far from out, and every attack, every strike, made one thing abundantly clear: the humans were fighting back. And they weren't about to stop. The success of the recent strike had sent ripples through both sides of the conflict. For the first time, the Drathari realized that their occupation of Earth might not be as straightforward as they had once believed. The humans had done what seemed impossible. They had pushed back, and in doing so, they had made their presence felt in the most critical of ways. As General Sokath's fleet began to regroup, his irritation simmered beneath the surface. Each new loss, small but growing, gnawed at his pride. The humans had been underestimated, and now the galaxy's mightiest conquerors were forced to contend with a planet they had presumed would bow before them. No longer could the Drathari assume their victory was inevitable. The Resistance had proven one undeniable truth: humanity would never surrender. In the Resistance's underground network, Arya Jensen was already preparing for the next phase of their counteroffensive. The recent victories had been critical, but they were also a double-edged sword. As the humans grew bolder, the Drathari would grow more ruthless. Every day was a race against time. "Arya, we've got eyes on their next target," Darius reported, his voice cold and calculated. "The Drathari are moving forces into the Siberian wastes. It's their next landing site. Big. They're going to build another supply base there. If they manage it, they'll have access to all the resources they need to push back hard." Arya's mind raced. If the Drathari managed to gain a foothold in the frozen wilderness, they would be able to establish a more permanent presence on Earth. And if that happened, it wouldn't be long before the entire continent fell under their control. "We need to stop them before they even set foot on the ground," Arya replied, her voice steely with resolve. "Darius, I want a full tactical assault. The moment they touch down, we'll hit them hard." The strategy was set into motion quickly. The Siberian wastes weren't just a frozen desolation. They were home to an underground network of old military bunkers and research labs, many of which had been abandoned years ago. It was the perfect place to launch a surprise attack. Small, highly mobile forces could infiltrate the Drathari's landfall zones, using the environment to their advantage. As night fell, Arya's team prepared for the operation. Unlike the earlier battles, this wouldn't be about decoys or guerrilla tactics. It would be about precision, a surgical strike designed to cripple the Drathari's supply lines before they could establish dominance. They had done the impossible before. Now it was time to do it again. Hours later, the eerie silence of the Siberian wilderness was shattered by the sound of engines roaring to life. The Resistance's forces, comprising an eclectic mix of military veterans, engineers, and former scientists, moved swiftly through the dense snow and ice, cloaked by the cover of night. Area's team was positioned at the forefront, each member carrying specialized equipment to ensure the strike would be devastating. The first phase of the operation began with a series of EMP pulses that disrupted Drathari communications, just as they had done before. However, this time, the attack was timed to perfection. The moment the Drathari ships touched down, they were blind, deaf, and crippled. "Their landing site is surrounded," Darius said over the comms. "No way out. Time to make them pay." Aria's lips curled into a grim smile. She had prepared for every contingency, but this was still a gamble. They were striking at the heart of an alien invasion, and the Drathari would retaliate. But the humans had no choice. They couldn't afford to let the enemy gain any more ground. The Resistance launched their assault. Small, specialized teams armed with plasma pulse rifles and ion disruptors tore into the Drathari soldiers as they attempted to organize. The bitter cold of the Siberian wastes didn't slow them down. In fact, it played into their hands. The Drathari's technology wasn't designed to fight in such extreme conditions. They were confused, scattered, and vulnerable. "What's the damage on their side?" Aria asked, her eyes narrowing as she surveyed the scene. "They didn't expect this." Sarah's voice crackled through the comm. "They're not even properly fortified. We got a chance to push them off the continent for good." The operation was in full swing. Resistance fighters disabled Drathari ships, using a combination of mined explosives and hand-to-hand combat. They moved like phantoms through the snow-covered expanse, their movements swift, calculated. The Drathari were losing their grip, and every time they tried to regroup, the Resistance struck again, hitting them from multiple angles. Aria watched from a distance, her pulse racing with a mixture of pride and caution. This was humanity's moment. They weren't just defending anymore. They were attacking, pushing the Drathari off their land, reclaiming their world inch by inch. But, as Aria had feared, the Drathari were learning. Even in the midst of their retreat, Sokath was analyzing the situation with a cold, calculating mind. He wouldn't make the same mistake again. "General, their forces are relentless," Tarax reported from the command deck. "We've lost almost half our initial landing force, and they're still coming." Sokath stood silent for a moment, weighing his options. Then, a grim determination crossed his features. "Send in the Warmix," Sokath ordered. "It's time to show them the full might of the Drathari fleet." Within minutes, the first of the Drathari Warmix descended from the skies. Massive, heavily armored giants that moved with an eerie grace. These towering machines of destruction were capable of leveling entire cities in minutes, and their heat-seeking particle beam weapons could vaporize anything in their path. Aria saw the first of the Drathari mechs touch down, its shadow casting a terrifying presence over the battlefield. For a moment, it felt as though the tides of war had shifted. Humanity had fought so hard to take back the land, and now it seemed the Drathari had brought their ultimate weapon to the fray. But Aria refused to back down. She had seen humanity face insurmountable odds before and come out on top. The Resistance was still strong, still relentless, and this battle, this war, was not over yet. "Darius, prep the Omega Charge," she ordered, her voice sharp. The Omega Charge was a last resort weapon, a powerful experimental device that could disable a Drathari mech suit in an instant. The charge would only work once, and it would cost them dearly, but it was their only chance to even the playing field. "We take down their machines. We take down their confidence," Aria muttered, a spark of fire lighting in her eyes. "Let's show them what we're really made of." The battle raged on, with both sides now at a tipping point. Humanity was fighting with everything they had, and the Drathari were beginning to realize the price of their arrogance. The human spirit, resilient, defiant, and unwilling to surrender, was taking on an entirely new meaning in the cosmos. The war was far from over, but the Resistance had one thing the Drathari didn't: hope, and with it, an unshakable will to win. The Omega charge hummed with an energy that seemed to vibrate the very air around it. It was their last chance. Humanity had pushed the Dratheri shock troops to the brink of collapse, but the war machines, those towering, near-invincible Warmix, had emerged as the true terror of the battlefield. With each mechanical titan the Dratheri deployed, humanity's momentum stalled, grinding to a halt. Area Jensen stood behind the front line, a small team of engineers working frantically to prepare the Omega charge. They had only one shot. If they miscalculated, if the Dratheri adapted too quickly, they would lose everything. "How are we looking?" Area asked, her voice tense as she watched the skies darken with more incoming Drathari warships. "We're almost there," said Darius, his eyes scanning the readouts on a nearby terminal. "The charge is primed and ready. But those mechs, if they get within firing range of us, will be crushed." Area nodded. Time was running out. The Dratheri weren't just fighting to win anymore. They were fighting to annihilate humanity. Each mech that landed, each wave of assault, brought them closer to wiping out the last vestiges of the resistance. Meanwhile, General Xokath paced back and forth within the confines of the Dratheri command ship. His mind churned with irritation and frustration. These humans had proven to be infuriatingly adaptable, a thorn in the side of his carefully laid plans, but he would not let them destroy what he had worked so hard to conquer. The Omega charge had caught them off guard once, but now the humans were merely delaying the inevitable. "They are bold," Xokath muttered to his officers, "but boldness will not save them." Tarax stood beside him, his yellow eyes glowing with suspicion. "General, they have no more weapons to use against us. They're getting desperate." "Good," Xokath snapped. "Then we will push them past their breaking point. Send in the elite hunters. They will track down every human soldier and crush them." The elite hunters were the Dratheri's most fearsome warriors, trained for infiltration, assassination, and total annihilation. Each one was an expert in psychological warfare, designed to instill fear in their enemies. But Xokath was not just thinking of these few elite fighters. His real plan was far more insidious. He would unleash a psychological campaign that would demoralize humanity to the core. Back on the battlefield, Area watched as the first of the Warmix stepped forward, their massive feet shaking the ground with each step. The metallic giants loomed like gods of destruction. They towered over the human forces, their weapons poised to obliterate anything in their path. "We need to act now," Area said, her voice barely audible over the rumble of the approaching mechs. She turned to Sarah Wells, her most trusted commander. "Prepare your team. When I give the signal, hit the Omega charge and get the hell out." Sarah nodded, her face set in a grim determination. "We're ready." With a final glance at the Omega charge, Area activated the countdown. The electrical hum grew louder, vibrating through the ground, building to a peak as the charge gathered power. Every soldier, every resistance fighter knew this moment could decide the future of Earth. Then the first Warmix took its final step, positioning itself in front of the Omega charge. Area didn't hesitate. Now, the Omega charge detonated with a blinding flash, sending a shockwave that knocked even the Dratheri machines off balance. For a moment, the world seemed to stop as the electromagnetic pulse ripped through the battlefield. The Warmix staggered, their systems scrambled by the sudden surge of power, but the battle wasn't over yet. For a brief moment, Area thought they had succeeded. She watched as the Dratheri machines twitched and stuttered, their weapon systems going offline. Victory was within reach. But as the dust began to settle, the silence was broken by an ominous sound. The Warmix were recovering. The damage from the Omega charge hadn't been enough to destroy them. They were still standing, still threatening. Area's heart sank. "Darius, what the hell is happening?" The charge wasn't powerful enough to fully disable their core systems. Darius replied quickly. "They're rebooting faster than we anticipated." Sarah's voice crackled through the comms. "They're about to retaliate. Get your team out of there." Area didn't need to be told twice. The Warmicks were recovering faster than expected, and their weapons were already targeting human positions. A new strategy was needed, but there was no time for hesitation. On the Drathari command ship, Sokath watched in silent satisfaction as the human forces scattered in response to the counterattack. His elite hunters were closing in on the resistance, and the humans' brief moment of triumph had evaporated in the face of his overwhelming power. "They're retreating. Now is the time to crush them," Tokath said. But Tarax wasn't so sure. "General, we're tracking a large number of human fighters moving toward our position. It looks like they're gathering for a final stand." Sokath sneered. "Let them try. I'll enjoy watching them burn." Back on Earth, Arya knew that retreating wasn't an option. The Drathari were relentless. They had learned from every strike humanity had made, adapting their tactics with deadly precision. But that didn't matter now. Humanity had one weapon the Drathari could never replicate: ingenuity. "Gather the survivors," Arya said. "We're not running anymore. We're hitting back." In a last-ditch effort, humanity's remaining fighters scrambled to deploy their remaining arsenal: anti-mech drones, heavily modified civilian vehicles retrofitted with military-grade weaponry, and the remains of old satellite arrays that could deliver devastating orbital strikes. Arya knew they needed to level the playing field before the Drathari had a chance to finish them off completely. The final stand was beginning. Every resistance fighter was prepared to give everything to keep Earth's dream alive. But it wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about sending a message to the Drathari. "We fight as one," Arya said, rallying her troops. "We fight until the last breath." With their backs against the wall, humanity would have to employ every ounce of creativity and resolve they had. The Warmicks were still closing in, and their power was overwhelming. But the resistance had one final card to play. In the heart of the battlefield, Arya stood among the remnants of her forces, ready to face the Drathari head-on. The fate of Earth rested on the shoulders of every soldier who had the courage to defy the impossible. The dust was still thick in the air, swirling around the broken bodies of destroyed machines and the weary soldiers who remained standing. The Omega charge had given humanity a momentary hope, but the Drathari had recovered far too quickly. The Warmicks, though damaged, were now advancing with an eerie mechanical precision, their massive frames casting long shadows over the devastated battlefield. "We don't have much time," Arya Jensen said, her voice as cold and steely as the frozen ground beneath her boots. She surveyed the battlefield, where the last remnants of the Resistance's forces had regrouped, ready to give everything for Earth's survival. "We've got to hit them where it hurts, or we'll lose this planet forever." The Drathari elite hunters were closing in, their cloaking technology making it nearly impossible for the humans to track them. But Arya had anticipated this. This was the moment she had feared. The Resistance's final, desperate attempt to push back the overwhelming power of the Drathari. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, turning the battlefield a sickly orange, Arya knew the humans had one advantage the Drathari had underestimated: adaptability. "All units, rally on my position," she commanded. "We make our stand here. No retreat." Darius stepped up beside Arya, his face grim but determined. "We've been fighting for months. We've lost too many already. But I agree, Arya. This is it." He turned to address the rest of the Resistance fighters, those who still stood ready to fight. "The Drathari have their Warmicks, but we have our will. We're not leaving this battlefield. Not while we still have breath to fight." A low murmur of agreement rippled through the ranks. The soldiers, though battered and worn, seemed to find strength in Darius's words. They were tired, but they weren't broken. The human spirit was a force the Drathari had underestimated, and now they were about to feel its full force. "Arya," Sarah Wells called, moving up to her with a look of concern. "I've just received word from our engineers. The satellite array is online. We can deliver an orbital strike, but only one. It's a last-ditch effort, and it's all we've got left." Arya's eyes narrowed as she considered the proposal. The array had been salvaged from the wreckage of a long-dead space station orbiting the planet. It had taken months to get it operational again, but it was their only chance. One shot. If they timed it right, the orbital strike could destroy the Drathari Warmix and cripple their remaining forces. "Do it," Arya said without hesitation. "We'll hold them off long enough. Get it ready." Meanwhile, the Drathari were not idle. General Xokath stood at the front of his command ship, watching the chaotic battlefield unfold below. The humans had put up a fight, but their resistance was beginning to buckle under the weight of the Drathari's overwhelming might. His elite hunters had already begun picking off isolated human soldiers, and the Warmix were closing in. "They are desperate," Xokath said with a sneer. "And that makes them dangerous, but not dangerous enough." He signaled for reinforcements to arrive, his cold voice cutting through the command center. "Deploy the drone swarms. We will flood them with firepower." As he spoke, thousands of small, nimble drones were launched from the Drathari ships, swarming the battlefield like a cloud of death. The drones were equipped with pulse lasers and explosive charges, capable of overwhelming even the most fortified human positions. Xokath had expected the humans to struggle, but he had not anticipated their ability to adapt to every new weapon he threw at them. He had underestimated their resolve. Now he would ensure there would be no more surprises. The drones would finish what the Warmix had started. Back on Earth, Arya's eyes narrowed as she saw the incoming swarm of Drathari drones. "Get the anti-air turrets online," she ordered. "We need to take out those drones before they can overwhelm us." A new wave of human fighters moved into position, using their last reserves of energy to fire EMP blasts and guided missiles at the oncoming swarm. The drones scattered in the air, but some still made it through, firing their deadly weapons on the resistance positions. Arya ducked as an explosion rocked the ground beside her. The battlefield was becoming a hellscape, every square meter torn apart by the clash of metal and the constant hum of energy weapons. But even in the chaos, Arya could feel a glimmer of hope. "Sarah, is the satellite ready?" she asked, her voice a bit hoarse from the strain. "We're good to go," Sarah replied, voice tight with stress. "But we need a clear shot. The Warmix are too close." A cold sweat ran down Arya's neck. They were fighting for their lives, and if they missed their shot, it would be over. "We've got one chance. We need to stall them," Arya said, her jaw clenched. She looked over to Darius, who was already preparing his team. "We'll cover the satellite's trajectory. You get that orbital strike, and we'll keep the Drathari distracted." With grim determination, the resistance soldiers formed a defensive perimeter around the satellite array. Their only hope, the Warmix, still advancing relentlessly, were closing in. Every blast, every explosive, was another step closer to their doom. But Arya held firm. The Drathari wouldn't win this fight, not without paying for it. The human soldiers unleashed every weapon they had left, creating a field of fire that tore into the Drathari's ranks. They fought with ferocity, refusing to let the invaders have their victory. Arya, surrounded by the chaos of battle, watched as the orbital strike was initiated. For a split second, everything slowed down. She could see the incoming beam of energy, a pinpoint of light cutting through the atmosphere, on its way to its target. The Drathari Warmix were right in its path, their massive forms blocking the last line of defense. But Arya didn't flinch. The strike hit with the force of a meteor, blasting the Warmix apart in a cataclysmic explosion. Shockwaves ripped through the battlefield, toppling soldiers and tearing apart everything in its path. The Drathari had underestimated humanity once again, and now they would pay the price. As the smoke cleared, Arya surveyed the devastation. The battlefield was a wasteland, littered with the wreckage of Drathari machines and the fallen bodies of the brave men and women who had fought to the end. "We did it," Darius said, his voice ragged but filled with awe. Arya nodded, her eyes never leaving the scene. "We've bought ourselves time. But the war isn't over. The sky above the battlefield was a patchwork of fire and smoke, a gruesome testament to the battle humanity had just endured. The Dratheri's once imposing line of war machines had been shattered, the hulking remains of the Wormix scattered across the ground in a twisted heap of scrap. The orbital strike had dealt a massive blow, but the cost to the resistance had been high. Aria Jensen stood amidst the wreckage, her face streaked with dirt, her clothes torn and stained with the blood of those who had fought beside her. She surveyed the aftermath in silence, the magnitude of their victory not sinking in just yet. The destruction of the Wormix had given them a moment of breathing room, but the battle was far from over. "We've made a dent," Aria muttered to herself, her voice hoarse. But not enough. Darius stood beside her, his gaze locked on the horizon, his thoughts just as grim. The battle had been won, but the Dratheri were not finished yet. "We've stalled them, but we need to keep pushing. They'll rebuild. They always rebuild." Aria nodded, a bitter taste in her mouth. "I know, but for now, we have a small window to regroup. Let's make the most of it." Back on the Dratheri command ship, General Sokath was livid. His once unshakable confidence had been shattered in the wake of the orbital strike. His Wormix, his prized weapons, had been obliterated, their towering frames nothing more than twisted metal. But the real fury bubbled beneath the surface. "They didn't just attack our machines," Sokath growled. "They attacked our pride. They humiliated us." Trax, standing at his side, could feel the change in the general's demeanor. "They're resourceful, these humans, but they've only bought themselves a fleeting victory." Sokath clenched his fists. "Then we'll show them what true power is." He turned toward the strategists gathered in the command room. "Prepare the Dark Ascendant fleet. If they think this war is over, they are sorely mistaken. We will hit them where it hurts most, their cities." Tarax raised an eyebrow. "You think they're not already prepared for a counterattack?" "I know they're prepared," Sokath replied, "but they won't expect us to use full-scale orbital bombardment. If we can level their cities, it will break their spirit. We'll wipe them out in one swift strike." Tarax remained silent for a moment before responding. "Very well, General, but be mindful of the resistance network. They've learned how to fight back. The humans are more dangerous than we first realized." Sokath's gaze hardened. "That's exactly why we're going to break them." On Earth, Aria's team had moved quickly to establish a temporary base, one made from the wreckage of Dratheri ships and the remnants of their fallen forces. The victory was sweet, but the cost had been high. Many had fallen, their sacrifices echoing in the minds of the survivors. They had made progress, but the next phase of the war would require them to be smarter, faster, and even more ruthless. As Aria entered the makeshift command center, she found Sarah Wells poring over the latest intelligence reports. The situation had changed again. "Any updates?" Aria asked, her tone sharp. Sarah looked up, a look of unease crossing her face. "The Dark Ascendant fleet is mobilizing. They're preparing for something big." Aria's stomach sank. The Dark Ascendant fleet was the Dratheri's most terrifying weapon, an armada of ships capable of leveling entire cities with their advanced weaponry. The fact that they were preparing for orbital bombardment confirmed one thing: the Dratheri were planning to break Earth's will once and for all. "How soon?" Aria asked, already knowing the answer. "Within hours," Sarah replied, her voice tight. "They've already deployed scout ships. The bombardment will begin as soon as they're in position." Aria turned away from the map, her mind racing. Earth had already survived so much, and now, facing an oncoming storm of unimaginable scale, their options were limited. The orbital bombardment would reduce entire cities to rubble, leaving the resistance with nowhere to hide. "We need a way to stop it," Aria said, her voice resolute. "I know," Sarah replied. "But the ships are too well guarded. We need to get inside their fleet somehow. Get close enough to disable their systems before they can start firing." Darius approached, his face grim. "It's a suicide mission. We'd have to infiltrate their fleet, right into the heart of it. Arya glanced at Darius, knowing the truth. But we don't have a choice. If they destroy the cities, the resistance will crumble. We need to take the fight to them, hit them where it counts. The plan was risky. More than risky, it was insane. But if they didn't act fast, Earth would be lost. Arya and her team worked tirelessly, coordinating with their allies to prepare for a bold infiltration. They would need a small team, specialized in stealth and sabotage, to infiltrate the Drathuri fleet before they could unleash their bombardment. The final plan was simple: a stealth assault on the Dark Ascendant fleet. The team would board one of the Drathuri command ships using cloaking technology, provided by the remnants of the Drathuri drones, and plant EMP devices in key systems, hoping to disable their weapons before it was too late. The mission would be dangerous, and it was likely that they would not all make it back. "This is it," Arya said, addressing her team. "We'll have one shot at this. We're going up against an entire fleet. But if we succeed, we give humanity a chance, not just to survive, but to win." As Arya stood in front of her assembled team, she could feel the weight of the moment bearing down on her. They had come so far, and now the final battle was ahead. The humans were battered, bruised, but they weren't broken. The Drathuri may have thought that their latest strike would crush humanity's spirit, but Arya knew the truth. Humanity had a fire inside them that the Drathuri could never understand, a fire that couldn't be extinguished. "We're going to take the fight to them," Arya said with finality, "and we're going to make sure the Drathuri regret ever coming here." The countdown had begun. The Dark Ascendant fleet, a formidable armada of Drathuri warships, hovered above Earth like a storm waiting to strike. Arya Jensen and her team had infiltrated the enemy's ranks, boarding one of the massive command ships using cloaking devices scavenged from Drathuri drones. The clock was ticking, and the team had just minutes to plant the EMP devices that would disable the fleet's weapon systems before they could unleash their devastating orbital bombardment. Arya's heart raced as she led her squad through the dark, metallic corridors of the Drathuri ship. The ship's corridors were eerily quiet, the hum of alien technology reverberating through the walls. The sound of their footsteps was drowned by the constant whir of the ship's engines, until a voice cut through the silence. "Intruders detected." A cold, robotic tone echoed over the intercoms. Red lights flashed, and the ship's security systems came online, locking down all exits and activating defense turrets throughout the vessel. Arya's heart skipped a beat, but she kept moving, never breaking stride. "We've been compromised," Darius muttered, his voice grim. "We're running out of time." "We're close," Arya replied. "We just need to get to the core and plant the charges. If we fail, everything's over." The team pushed forward with urgency, their weapons at the ready, knowing that each passing second brought them closer to the Drathuri fleet, unleashing apocalyptic firepower on Earth. The corridors twisted and turned, leading them deeper into the heart of the ship, until they reached the core, where the Drathuri's weapon systems were housed. Arya signaled to her team, and they immediately got to work. Sarah Wells, a brilliant engineer, hacked into the ship's security grid, bypassing the alien encryption to gain access to the central control panel. "We've got a problem," Sarah said, her fingers flying over her handheld device. "The systems are on lockdown. It's going to take a minute to override them." "We don't have a minute," Darius growled, his eyes darting to the timer on his wrist. "We've got seconds, not minutes." The alarm blared again, louder now. Drathuri reinforcements were approaching, their heavy footsteps pounding against the floor. It was only a matter of time before they found them. Arya's pulse quickened. "Sarah, get it done now." Arya snapped, her voice sharp as steel. With a final burst of speed, Sarah hacked the last security barrier, and the control panel flashed green. "We're in," she exclaimed. Without wasting a moment, Arya grabbed one of the EMP devices and slammed it into the core's central terminal. The device hummed to life, sending out a pulse of electromagnetic energy that started to fry the Drathari systems. But the damage wasn't immediate. The countdown was still ticking, and the alien ships above Earth were ready to fire. "Get ready to move," Arya ordered. "The EMP won't hold them for long." The team gathered their gear and prepared for a quick escape, but before they could make their way back to the transport dock, the door to the core room slammed open. Standing in the doorway, silhouetted by the flashing lights of the control room, was Kokath, the Drathari general. "You humans are persistent," he sneered, his voice low and menacing. "But you are still ants beneath our feet. You will never." Before he could finish, Darius opened fire, his rifle sending a burst of laser fire into the general's chest. But Kokath's personal shield absorbed the blast, and he charged forward with unnatural speed, his clawed hands reaching for Arya's throat. With a quick, practiced motion, Arya sidestepped, drawing her combat knife and slashing across the general's exposed side. Sparks flew from his armor as the blade struck, but the wound was superficial at best. Kokath howled in rage, but Arya was already moving, ducking under his swing and backing toward the exit. "We're out of time," she shouted. The general roared in fury and launched himself at her again, but before he could land a blow, Darius tackled him, throwing both of them into the control console. The EMP pulse flickered as the Drathari general tried to get back on his feet, but the damage had been done. The strike was not enough to disable the entire fleet, but it had delayed their weapon systems long enough for the resistance to make their escape. "Go," Darius shouted, shoving Arya toward the exit. The remaining team members bolted, running as fast as they could through the labyrinthine corridors of the alien ship. They'd reached the docking bay where a stolen Drathari fighter awaited them, but the ship's engines were powered down. They couldn't take off without manual override. "Move," Arya ordered, throwing herself into the pilot's seat. She began firing up the engines as fast as she could, but the Drathari were already on their tail. The ship's alarm blared as the Drathari soldiers stormed the bay, firing their weapons. Arya gritted her teeth and punched the throttle, sending the ship soaring into the void of space. The blast of the engines pushed them forward, but the Drathari weren't giving up so easily. Their ships launched from the fleet's command center, racing toward the fleeing humans. "Sarah, tell me the EMP's holding," Arya said, her eyes darting to the onboard display. "For now," Sarah replied, "but I can't guarantee how long it'll last. The fleet's going to be back in full force soon." "I know," Arya said, her jaw clenched. "We need to get back to Earth. We need to warn everyone." As the ship tore through the atmosphere, Arya saw the looming shadows of the dark ascended fleet just behind them. They had won a victory, but Earth's survival was still in the balance. The war wasn't over, not by a long shot, but as they broke through the clouds, the fighters raced back to Earth. Arya knew one thing for certain: humanity wasn't going down without a fight.